Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to one more of our platform conversations at DAG. Events that we organize on a regular basis to get audiences, wonderful audiences like you, to come in and interact with us, with our scholars, with our curators, with experts, with people who shed light on the world of art, popular culture, etc., which all of us have kind of engaged with in various ways. As I say every time, DAG as an institution is 30 years old and has one of the most fabulous collections of art, which allows curators to dig deep into and put together the kind of exhibitions such as the one on Kali that we are surrounded by as we sit over here. And thanks to Gayatri, who came in with that wonderful idea and curated this very powerful and very exciting and very, very original exhibition, which is, of course, accompanied with a very, very accomplished text in a book that supports the exhibition. We're all delighted to have you over here. Our panelists today are well-known Gayatri, of course, in the curatorial world. I think all of us have been exposed to her work and her exhibitions now for 3 decades, since the 90s, huh? Since the 90s. And just a little personal thing, Gayatri, of course, was my senior in school. She was my senior in the writing world, and she's my senior in the art world. So I doff my hat to you every time, Gayatri. Shobhaa did, again, I mean, it's a cliche to say needs no introduction, but that cliche is very much what she represents, etc., as an author, columnist, etc. And growing up in India, she gave us that liberty and that freedom to be ourselves and create an identity for us through her writing. So thank you for that, and welcome to DAG. The Kali show, of course, was in the happening for a while. Much of it actually has been put together through DAG's own archives, whether it's the paintings that are here, the prints, the watercolors, the fabulous collection of Kali Ghats that support the early Bengal oils, and the supporting ephemera that is part of the exhibition. I noticed that number of you did come in a little early and caught glimpses of the exhibition. We also have a concurrent exhibition running on the floor upstairs, so do grab this opportunity to catch a small glimpse of that. To kind of start off this conversation, I'm going to read a few lines from Gayatri's very, very masterful text on Kali to kind of throw out the idea of who Kali is and who she represents and what she means to us historically, as well as, of course, in current times. The exhibition, of course, takes a look at Kali's representations in terms of sacred iconography, in terms of political iconography, social iconography, and commercial iconography. I think the conversation kind of takes off from that point and moves into the kind of exciting new arenas that I hope you will take forward. So, to quote Gayatri, the catalogue refers to Kali as a revolutionary mascot, describing her depiction in Bengal as heavily sexualized. She's nude, her breasts are bare and adorned with a garland of skulls, and she wears a girdle of severed human hands around her waist. She occupies the forbidden space of the cremation ground, surrounded by carrion and jackals. There is much symbolism attached to interpretations of a lolling tongue, ranging from the grotesque to the sexual. Then she tells us about a 1917 report on the revolutionary movement in Bengal, where a Kali image is seen as fomenting political trouble and is depicted as wearing a garland of the decapitated heads of Englishmen in a frontispiece image. From a 1885-95 BD commercial, she invokes Kali thus. If you care to, I mean, this is what the advertising message is. If you care to improve the manufacture of national products, if the welfare of the nation's poor laborers is your concern, if you have a sense of good and bad, then, oh Hindu brothers, smoke these Kali cigarettes. And finally, in Sister Nivedita's 1990 publication, Kali the Mother, she quotes Kali, the goddess, saying, "For this age is great in time, and even I, Kali, am the mother of the nations." So that's the range that we're talking about in terms of the iconography and imagery that we see around Kali, the iconoclast, the popular figure, and her representations and manifestations. So Gayatri, to kind of kickstart this conversation, who is this interchangeable, chimera-like Kali? What does she represent to you, to us, historically, and in current times?
Wow, that's a big question. And it was really the kind of question that I wanted to answer. But first, thank you. Thank you, DAG, for enabling this excellent exercise in research. I thought it would be a 5,000 word essay, it became 12,000 words, and I could have gone on, and it took the better part of 1 year. It's a deeply immersive subject because Kali is contemporary, and I think with Shobhaa ji here and Kishore here, we can maybe unpack some of the positions that she has come to occupy, at least in the last 100 years. For me as a curator, the important thing was to try to understand who was Kali, a minor goddess, who actually doesn't have a very long sculptural or temple history. Why does she suddenly blow into our faces with such vigor, even ferocity and energy in the last 150 years? What is the propulsion? If we go back to where does she emanate from, Gayatri Spivak says she's certainly, prehistoric. She was the goddess, she was aboriginal, dark skin, nudity, open hair, which of course is, these are the markers of modesty and goodness. Compare her with, say, Lakshmi, demure, passive, seated, dependent on all the domestic appurtenances of wealth. Kali has none of that. And we know that the first references to Kali are from, say, the Devi Mahatmya, 5th century, where she is described as coming out in a moment of deep rage. Durga is fighting Chand and Mund, and these two baddies, these two asuras, are giving her a very hard time in battle, and her brow darkens with rage. From that rage, Kali is manifest. Now the challenge, if we are to try to put together an exhibition historically, is to say, how does that rage manifest in art? Where are the visual evidences of this? They come much later. They come in around, say, the 16th, 17th century, where we see Kali in hill painting, lovely folios of the Devi Mahatmyam in the Jammu Museum, Simla National Museum, which I would urge you to see, the Basoli paintings on Kali. They are to die for. She is thin, gaunt, none of the sexualized erotic imagery of Bengal, hair is matted. There's one painting in which she is going to consume the demon Rakta Bij, and the tongue goes right across the page as she seems to be drawing in all the, the asuras whom she's going to consume. What have we got? We've got a goddess who can be a cannibal. She's occupying, as we know, the cremation grounds. She's not like on the ocean of milk like Vishnu. She doesn't have Kailash like Shiva. She doesn't have the grandness of Durga, Mahishasur-Mardini's Meru. She has none of that. She has the worst address in town, living in a cremation ground. And yet she has more and more power. She is the most mutable goddess actually of the last 150 years. And I think it's important to understand why. So some of the works over here in this wonderful DAG collection tell us about the envisioning of the gods and goddesses of India as monstrosities. Partha Mitter has written a wonderful book, Much Maligned Monsters, 1977 book, which you can understand as, the divinities of India are really atrocious. So Kali herself was given fangs, claws, fur, a hideous appearance. She was supposed to be the goddess of the thugs. There's this wonderful work here, and they are going out in the evening on your right, on literally the first work above the lady's head. And Kali is supposed to be inspiring a kind of thuggy cult, and the thuggy cult suggests murder, robbery, particularly of the British. But by now, Bengal has embraced Kali. She is no longer the emaciated Kali of the northern paintings. A tantric has had a vision of her. His name is Krishnananda Agambaghish. Agambaghish sees her as a lovely, plump young woman who's also maternal, who's also sexualized, who's also protective, who's also whimsical. And Krishnananda Agambagish's poetry sort of flows forward, and Bengal still produces a line of poets who are actually celebrating Kali as the wonderful protective mother. She becomes the mother figure, so to speak. And this figure then becomes a part of the whole print industry that sort of takes over parts of North India as well as South India. And we see the Kali image being perpetuated. The paintings on this side of the room are what we call the new Bengal paintings of that era, where Kali is obviously a very popular subject. And then she sort of starts to flow right through the 20th century. There are very few movements, very few protests, very few rebellions which do not co-opt Kali. And this is, what is this? Is it because she's a minor goddess? She is not Lakshmi, she is not 𝘞𝘁𝘓𝘧𝘐𝑚𝑟𝑑ini. She is only born out of the head of 𝘞𝘁𝘓𝘓𝘧𝘐𝑚𝑟𝑑ini in a time of battle. And she appears in the Devi Mahatmayam to sort of knock off asuras, Raktabi, Chandmun, etc., and then disappears. So she has actually a minor role. But what is it about her that through the 20th century she's adopted? Jitu Santhal, the Santhals want to be recognized. The entire tribal belt of the Chota Nagpur plateau, Bihar, etc., want recognition. What do? They embrace Kali. Kali worship becomes, very popular. They become Hinduized. The Devi movement of Gujarat, which David Hardiman has written about, because this was anti-Parsi landlords, this was anti-alcoholism. Who do they embrace? Devi again. Kali of Pavagadh in Gujarat. You have Kalika, you have Kali, you have Bahuchara. These three goddesses represent an acceptance of disability. Khodiyar, one wooden leg for Bahuchara. The LGBTQ community, these goddesses sort of give them validity, they give them valence, they give them social acceptance. And then, of course, the great Subhash Bose, Aurobindo Ghosh, inspired by Ramakrishna, inspired by Vivekanand, have actually installed Kali as the leader of the nationalist movement, the burgeoning nationalist movement. Ramakrishna's 1885 and the Congress party comes into existence in 1886. So these forces actually come together to make a very cogent argument for the goddess who's a rebel, the goddess who cannot be domesticated, the goddess who's indifferent towards even her spouse. She's trampling Shiva, but she's not even looking at him. She's striding along with this rebellious kind of energy. And you compare her to the other goddesses which are invoked at this time, the Bongo Mata of Abanindranath, very demure. All the middle class values of education, food, etc. are attributed to her. Kali doesn't really make any promises. It's only about energy, it's about faith, and it's about protection. So what we've tried to do in this exhibition from your collection is to bring it from early paintings of the north through the different manifestations. Kali is also the first of the Dasa Mahavidyas. She's really a pal, she's Durga's pal. There's a lovely painting on that side of the wall where the two women are sort of walking along. Kali's got a head in her hand, she's just knocked off somebody. They're having a little chit chat, and she's a part of a feminine cohort. She doesn't have the primacy or exclusiveness or regnal power of a Lakshmi who has elephants and gold, and Vishnu has to take a loan from Kuber to get to marry Lakshmi because she's so inaccessible, she's so difficult of access. Compare this with Kali, who's she goes through the entire vertical from Brahmanism to the Dalit. And we can talk a little bit later, I've spoken quite a lot at this moment, about the South Indian manifestation of Bhadrakali, where she is really the goddess of Dalit communities. So I'm really interested in seeing that we were able to get a kind of a circular movement from, say, the 17th century to the modern times. So it's about 250 years even a Hussain, even a Kartik Pine, even a Reddeppa Naidu, despite their geographic sort of distribution across the country, are enamored of this subject and they want to explore how they can give it a form. Thank you.
Super good. I mean, ideally, I'd like to start with asking you how, we've seen these changes through social political times over the last centuries, more than the sacred imagery, etc., and what she represents in the 21st century. But before you kind of take that up, Shobhaa, would you like to just kind of comment on what Gayatri just said, for example, of her being this wrathful, powerful form of Shakti, and as a goddess who's not domesticated, who's not soft, who's not benign, etc., there's a wildness to her. And that wildness, that liminal quality of danger that kind of surrounds her like a halo, is there a kind of popular cultural iconicism where she becomes the bad woman, and the bad woman cannot be domesticated, but there's also a little negative spirit around her?
Thank you. That's so academic. I am intimidated by how we have deconstructed Kali in every conceivable way. Whereas I'm here not as an academic at all, but as someone who is all for disruption. And I love the idea of Kali. We should invoke her this evening, particularly in Delhi. We could do with Kali walking around with several heads round her neck. We need more disruptive forces in our society. I didn't grow up knowing too much about Kali, but Gayatri's absolutely incredible research and the visuals that accompanied it drew me into the world in a way that I least expected. And I started getting more and more involved because, honestly speaking, a confession, Kali was Rolling Stones and their imagery. And I used to always wonder how on earth would the Rolling Stones think of Kali back then. But like Gayatri has explained, the way Kali's iconography traveled and different people related to her in different ways. And I think that is the beauty and strength and power of her. I have a love-hate relationship with her. I love the idea of this naked lady, in a smashan, sort of hanging around with a I don't care a damn attitude. But she seems very lonely as well, unlike some of her more pampered co-goddesses. I don't even know whether she's a goddess. I fear her, I'm fascinated by her, I am confused by her. There are times when I think I want to be Kali. There are times when I say, oh my God, do I really want to be Kali? Or isn't Durga somehow just more fulfilling? So I think the idea that Kali triggers off all these different contradictory responses in all of us. We have our own Kalis and all the versions are valid. And after reading Gayatri, I have kind of tracked how maybe she was created and how smart it was of the British, cunning as always, to use her to mobilize protests and to invoke a certain resistance and against the restless natives. So I think the time for Kali to be again brought into the forefront in our political environment is a much needed. We need Kali, we need many Kalis. To find her the way she has been honored in this exhibit, to take a nice, long and leisurely walk through it is an education in itself. Her many representations, and particularly the one that you talked about, where she's walking in a very casual way with Durga. And why does Kali threaten our society so much? Why is it that we worship her, but at the same time we don't completely accept her? I mean, for someone like 𝘠𝘭𝘭 𝘠𝘭𝘪, thank God for 𝘠𝘭𝘭 𝘠𝘭𝘪s, there should be more of her around. When she happened to mention that Kali was the charas smoking, alcohol drinking goddess, there was an FIR filed against her. We cannot accept that representation. We cannot accept our goddesses as anything less than, pillars of virtue, chaste and dutiful and worshipful. Whereas here is Kali, like you said, she doesn't even look either aage piche to bilkul hi nahi, but not even at Shiva who's at her feet. She's standing over him and looking away and on her own trip, as it were. That a lot of women in India would find extremely inspiring. But how many women will dare to be Kali? And that is the biggest challenge. How many of us want the Kali in us to be invoked and to be able to live that life like Kali?
So are we more threatened because this potent force is female?
I think female force on the whole is a threat to the world, but that she breaks all the rules is an even bigger threat. It's female force multiplied by, 1,000. So there is this figure who can actually completely destabilize the whole patriarchal structure as we know it, the whole societal structure as we have accepted. And that can cause certain discomfort in a very established society and a very structured society like ours.
Okay, so Gayatri, perhaps not coming in straight from the academic, let's say, basis and foundation, etc., would you consider Kali feminist? And why her among the pantheon of goddesses or gods that we have? Do we seek this response?
I think Kali Shobhaa is absolutely right. She's a great disruptor and she's a mark of some amount of chaos. But we must understand that her role is restorative. The goddesses become active or are invoked because of this failure of male agency. The gods have failed. The asuras are trampling the earth and creating the kind of havoc that they are doing, and then they all go, to whatever, Rudra, Shiva, etc., and say, help us. And from that, from the meeting of the gods and the light that emanates, this is academic, but it's a myth. Durga is born. And from Durga, the interesting thing is that they create an entirely feminine universe. There is no male agent in the entire bodies of Mahavidya, Saptamatrakas, all the goddesses that emerge from Durga are the female agents of change. And I think Kali is the most loyal. She always wins. I think the great thing about Kali is that if she is a feminist, it's also because she's a supreme feminist. She's unchallenged. In battle, she will always win. Now, in the process, she challenges the beauty myths. If a feminist doesn't care, if a feminist wants to establish a certain autonomy of the self and not kowtow to a patriarchy, then Kali is front and center. Look at the way she challenges Indian values: dark skin, open hair. You're not supposed to have open hair, it's supposed to be tied up only, it's only open hair for menstruating women. But she challenges this. Her tongue sticking out, a gesture of extreme rudeness, and no concern about the spouse trampled under her feet. So she challenges this, and then the fact that she can see males only as dead objects, the mala around her head. I think she is 2 or 3 things. She is a feminist in the sense that she compels change, but she's also a mother. For the poet or for the certain kind of worshipper, she is a kind of a stabilizing factor. She gives or nourishes when there is nothing else. Moments of poverty, moments of social decline, moments of economic hardship, Kali hangs around and pulls that particular community through.
All right, okay. So in that sense, she is, as a icon of subversive counterculture. I think she represents that sense of counterculture at a very early stage in terms of Indian mythology and myth making. Would you think that as a female deity, she plays a gender neutral role?
I think she plays
about it as a balancing factor, for example, a harmonizing factor, a restorative factor.
I think, like, if you look at these three pictures of 𝘍𝑰𝑔𝑒𝑒𝑪, which is a very Bengali, we don't have a 𝘍𝑰𝑔𝑒𝑪 in North India, you don't have a 𝘍𝑰𝑔𝑒𝑪 in South India. But you have her here, she's sitting on this tabletop or her asan, and the legs are not wooden legs, they are the gods. They are holding her up. So this is not gender neutral, this is gender dominant. The interesting thing is what happens in South India, where Tayyam, Mudiyettu, etc. are performed by lower caste men who also assume the role of the goddess. So there is a gender neutrality over here, where you assume the role of the goddess. When you become the goddess, and you may be one of the really lower caste sort of performers, but you can go into the house of a rich Nambudri or a Nayar and bless him. So in that sense, she is so transformative that the caste structure for that time, for those 9 nights of the performance of Navratri or whatever, is completely disbalanced. So in that sense, she grants this capacity to transform your gender, at least for a certain period of time. No other goddess does this. I think this is something that is particular to her.
So in terms of gender domination, for example, that Gayatri talks about, over the centuries, etc., how do you think her acceptance has come about? Has it come about through moments of turmoil in society and in political situations? Because that's really when she's evoked.
What actually astonishes me, especially when I'm in Kolkata, is that given, like you said, she has dead men as dead objects. That's how she looks at men. But men worship her too.
Oh, yes.
Men fear her. And in Kolkata, I mean, there'll be probably the men outnumber the women at Kalighat. So how does one explain men's acceptance, worship and respect of a goddess who clearly doesn't have a moment's time for them? Is something that puzzles me. Whether she is invoked only during times of crisis, I'm not sure, because now she's been kind of institutionalized as a very powerful member of a pantheon, but someone who stands apart from the others. The wild hair and all of it is also sexually very provocative, and perhaps a lot of her attraction has to do with that. Because her representation in Bengal is not the gaunt and not the frail and not the almost ascetic-like smashan ghat, trampling over the ashes of people. No, not at all. She's voluptuous, she's in charge, her eyes are challenging, her tongue is out. It's almost like, come and get me. Maybe that in itself is an attraction that is not acknowledged, because that can also threaten society. That how can a goddess be so sexually available? How can she be so attractive? And should we be curbing our own thoughts, lustful thoughts towards her representation in many ways? How do men accept Kali is a question I need to ask you actually, according to you in your research. How come there's not that dichotomy about fearing her is one thing, desiring her quite another?
This is a hard one because I didn't really, but I think desire is very much a part of the representation of Kali in Bengal.
Yeah.
She's in South India, Bhadrakali is a good Kali. She comes and restores order, knocks off the head of the landlord. And in the Bhadrakali episodes, in all of these kinds of performances, which are literally village to village, the important thing is that it's a woman who needs order to be restored. It's a woman who's been cheated. In one of the narratives, it's she read the Ramayana, so why can't women be educated? But the chieftain doesn't accept it. So then he, launches personal attack on her body, etc. And then she seeks Kali, and Kali comes and restores order. But I think the erotics of Kali are very much a part of the subtext of this exhibition. We see it over here. I mean, even in Kalighat, The fact that these people were painting at such short notice with one loaded brush, they gave it the kind of volume, voluptuousness that we associate with each of these goddesses. None of these, apart from Dhumavati, who's like dark and smoky, none of these is looking emaciated or gaunt. You're absolutely right about that. I think men turn to her because there's also what she compels is sacrifice. There is eros and there is sacrifice. There is eros and thanatos. The death and desire go very close together. You see it in the writing of Subhash Chandra Bose and Aurobindo, it is phenomenal. Both these men appropriate Kali because there is a desire to liberate the nation. Subhash Bose then writes and says, just focus on the goddess. For all her beauty, she is the mother. If you do this, you will curb your sexual desire. He writes this in Jugantar. You will curb your sexual desire and you can sacrifice yourself for the nation. And we have an image over here of him with the head lopped off like Chinnamasta. So this interchangeability between death and desire is very strong.
I wanted
very
to ask you
Freudian.
one more question is that since there's no fertility association with her at all, how come women, again, they normally tend to worship goddesses who promise them children, a husband, goddesses with wombs that are always giving. But here is a completely antithesis of all that women pray for.
You know,
what do they pray for? When they pray to Kali, what are they asking for?
I think strength, I think protection, I think some of the right choices. So the Bengali poets write of her as mind. 18th century, 19th century poets are speaking of Kali as my mind. It's almost an existential question. How is my mind going to be determined by the goddess? And I'm sure this would have been a cult that they would have certainly grown up with. But we must remember that none of the Indian gods have actually bear children. Durga's children, I mean Parvati, from her ear, Ganesh is born out of a piece of something or from an old cloth. There is no actual bearing of the body of the child. Lakshmi has no children. Mahish Mardini is given those children.
Kamakhya is what?
Kamakhya is the vulva of the goddess which falls down.
Yes, but the whole thing of the worship of menstruation as fertility and so on, the rite of passage and things, where does Kali fit into any of that? Or she doesn't? She's beyond
Kali's here.
Yeah.
Here also with the Mahavidyas. They are also when Sati is wanting to go to her father's sacrifice and Shiva says, no, you shouldn't go, he hasn't invited you. Then these 10 emerge and they contain Shiva. But over here, as we can see, with Kamakhya, they have different properties. Each of the goddesses has a different property, and some of them have the promise of fertility. Some of them have the promise of sustenance. And Kamakhya, I think, would be completely different from Kali in her own way.
Yeah.
So you talk about, for example, institutionalizing Kali, that she's been institutionalized over the last centuries, etc. I would, however, ask whether that is entirely true, Gayatri, in the sense you've said that perhaps she's a minor goddess. When the role she has to play is over, she disappears. Kali is also not someone you take home. She's not a part of your, let's say, the images of deity worships, etc. within the puja rooms at home, and certainly not within the domesticated spaces, etc. Which means all of this worship also happens outside. So therefore, what kind of institutionalization are we talking about for her?
Shobhaa said that.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah. No, I don't know if there's an institutionalization, but certainly temple building activity has given her a space. Dakshineshwar, West Bengal, Kali at Pavagadh in Gujarat, a number of the temples in North India which are in the Kangra region, etc. And in South India there are a number of Kali temples. You find them in Karnataka, etc. There is Kali is now embodied in temples. And in that sense, she has location. She's not just wandering within, the Shamshan Bhumis of your imagination. She's just not a tantric evocation.
So what about her role as a tantric goddess?
What about
What about her role as a tantric goddess in terms of this whole idea of fertility and desire, for example? Where does she fit into that scope?
I think I don't think she's exclusively prayed to. There are also like Tara 𝘠𝑒ℎ. Tara is the pregnant one who is behind here. And that's such an interesting thing. She's a naked goddess who's pregnant, and she's just wearing, khal of a leopard. And 𝘠𝑒ℎ would be the main site for tantric evocation. But I think what has happened in the 19th century is the poetization of Kali. John Woodruff, who translates the tantras and the agamas, etc., brings them into English, but gives them a highly poetic discourse about the power of the goddess. And I think the banning of a number of tantric kinds of practices like Bali, animal sacrifice, etc., would have brought Kali much more into the mainstream. She then is considered not so extreme, and people do take their children, etc., to these temples. So she's not seen as, and I think we have to think about this. There is an inevitability about death. She's the only person who's really talking about it, the only goddess who's emphatic that this is the reality. We all land up in the Shamshan Bhumi at one point or the other. She's not generative of violence. She's only the witness. She's not containing it, she's not provoking it, but she can be vengeful, as we saw with the British heads around her, because that was the moment of colonial power. So you could attribute that to Kali. We must understand these are all human attributions, death, desire, etc., etc. This is not something that is embedded in the Purans necessarily.
Shobhaa, if we were to look at the evocation of the deity in, let's say, the 21st century, in times that have changed and maybe not changed, how do we see her today? What kind of representation of her have we seen, or are we seeking? What kind of validation are we seeking for her?
We are seeking. I don't think we've found it at all. Because what we still imagine of Kali is the older and the classic version. A bloodthirsty woman, but certainly a woman with a mind of her own. And like I said earlier, every woman probably in this room and across the world is bloodthirsty at some point in her life. There are many people she'd like to finish off. And at that point, when you're full of despair,
I don't know what I'm doing on this.
not to be entirely cruel and horrible and sadistic towards the wonderful men in this room at all, but that is, these are the secret fantasies of 99% of women. Because of the kind of life that they have led, a lot of women at some point may identify during that period of turmoil and a sense of despair. They might identify with the Kali and want to invoke the Kali within, but don't have the guts to do it. And therefore, right now, I think if we can come up with a slightly more benign and relatable version of her, a true feminist icon who's not saying I hate men and I want to finish off all the men in my life, but I'll do it selectively, but that's a different story. But someone who is practical, who is offering some kind of way forward to engage with the realities of today in a way that is giving gyan, but giving gyan in a manner that is not so overt. It's not about going wild with your whatever you want to do. I'll do exactly what I please because, well, it's never really worked, has it? But Kali for our times, I would have kind of said Mamata, but I'm taking that back this minute. Though her form of protest has also been to sit in the middle of the road with her hair open and challenging the status quo, which way back when was a very powerful sense of inspiration for a lot of women in West Bengal, that if she could do it, and so can we. So another version of Kali, yes, I'm just trying to think whether in our
All from around the world.
Around the world.
And from different fields, not just political fields.
Well, politics shapes everything, doesn't it? So I can't really think of a great artists who might show up and or a great writer
But let's
who
say
will
the Meryl
just
Streeps of the world, are they the Kalis of our
no,
world?
they're not the
No,
Kalis at all. No, and also their sensibilities, their DNA is so different. We need a Kali that we can identify with very strongly, who can influence the way women are treated in our country. Well, we'll know soon enough where we stand in terms of how we are going to be treated over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, forever. But certainly we need someone to be challenging the status quo, as a Kali-esque figure. At the moment, I really cannot think of any one person who, it could be a man for that matter, with the Kali, with the qualities of Kali. But as of now, it's a barren field. I mean, maybe from nothing a Kali will emerge. I really and sincerely hope so. But she had better arrive fast because there's not much time to.
Okay, since you mentioned that it could be a man, Gayatri, I'd be interested in knowing, where does Shiva fit into this whole idea of Shiva and Shakti and the whole idea? I mean, he also can be a wrathful god. He's associated with death. He's associated with the Shamshan Ghats, cremation grounds, etc. His kind of company with the Aghoris and so on and so forth. So he does, in a sense, parallel the male principle of what Kali is as a female principle. But when we talk about Kali, why does Shiva not really become a part of this conversation? Why is he a separate conversation always?
That's because I think she, as the goddess, has numerous forms. So, like if you look at one of the texts, 14th century Kalika Puran, he marries a dark woman. He marries Kali and she's very dark. But what happens is that the beautiful Urvashi happens to go by. And he looks at his wife and very deprecatingly says to her, "Look at her, she's so fair and beautiful and you're so dark. And but please, offer her hospitality." She does what she has to, but she leaves. She goes away for several months, and before leaving she says to him, I think I've got it on this piece of paper, but it's a stunning modern comment. She says, "Never look down on those who have physical deformities, who are dark, who are poorer than you, and who are," she gives several things. These are all modern things. The Dalit, the destitute, all of these come into these categories. And she says, don't do that. And that's an interesting interjection in this, wonderful life of divinity that they are enjoying on Mount Kailash. And she goes away and she does tapasya, but then she emerges as the fair Gauri. And then Gauri, as Parvati, has her divine life and then becomes Durga as Mahishasur Mardini. So then there are several of these incarnations of from Kali to Sati to so on and so forth, whereas Shiva remains Shiva. And then I think the Bengali one is wonderful in the sense that he's completely passive. She's going wild. He is very domestic. He's pot-bellied. He's not doing very much. He's just hanging around. And she's charging around and doing her job. So in a way, that thing, the notion of female agency, that the female is so empowered. Even the one at 𝘘𝘶𝘪𝑒𝑠𝑤𝑟, I mean, what a stunning image. There's Shiva, he's always prone, lying on the ground. So in a way, she, I think she almost doesn't emasculate him, but she completely reduces Shiva.
But I have a problem with this obsession with her skin tone, her skin
Yeah,
color.
yeah.
And if that is something that is almost like a motif going through the narrative, that it's only when she becomes fairer, I mean, she becomes more attractive, that kind
That is
of
the
goes
problem.
against everything that today's world and today's equal thinking.
But look at the fact that it is
it's
probably
endorsing fair and lovely all over again.
Yeah, but it's also that there would have been the interjections of Brahminism, there would have been the higher castes, there would have been the North Indian Gangetic belt, cow belt kind of interjections into the color of the goddess. And what struck me while reading this was how marginal is Kali worship. Bengal, Kerala, Gujarat, Pahad. What about the whole, much of Madhya Bharat? You don't hear very much about Kali. You don't hear too much about, aspects of her worship or poets or kinds of pujas, etc. So she's actually pushed, and we must realize that there's a huge surge of Vaishnavism with the Bhakti Kal, etc. And Vaishnav Bhakti has beautiful gods. They have music, they have Chappan Bhog, they have, they have all the Bhog, Leela, Prasannata, music, everything that is beautiful and contained. Whereas she has to be pushed to the margins.
But there's a wonderful story in your essay about the breastplate which is behind us, the Tayam.
Tayam,
and how that represents so many things. Do you want to share that? Because I loved how you described it in your essay.
I'm not an expert on Tayam and Mudiyettu, I'm not. But we have enough knowledge to know that the breastplate is really transformative, because the makeup of the Tayam artist or in Kathakali, which is perhaps all male, would be taking hours and hours. And then when they wear the breastplate, they become the goddess. She'll be given long nails, long hair, which is completely wild. And the dance which she will perform that is the moment of disruption. That is the moment of both chaos and restoration.
Yes.
I think this has to be well understood. I'm actually not very fond of words like ferocious, wild, etc. in the sense that whatever she does will be disruptive, but the end result is always to restore a certain cosmic or a social order. It's balance, it's equivalence, it is equality. And that is what makes her such a contemporary figure.
Okay, I'm going to go into some last questions before we open this up to the audience. This one's for you. The West has attempted to co-opt Kali, as we know, in popular culture, etc. And today we talk about the whole idea of cultural appropriation, etc. So how valid is that, one? And two, how global do you think Kali is as a figure, what she represents?
I wouldn't call it a global phenomenon at all. There's a very, very superficial, very shallow idea of who Kali is, if they've even heard of her. The iconography of Kali is so powerful and so seductive and so easy to adopt, like in pop culture. That's why the Rolling Stones took the tongue. But beyond that, has the West really bothered about Kali?
Well, in the sense
not too much.
I mean, she
not really. They might have her on a T-shirt at a music concert or something like that. But they'll probably get it all wrong because they're not deeply invested nor interested. But I was just thinking about a female figure who would inspire someone globally. It's definitely not Taylor Swift, but someone like a Lady Gaga or a Madonna. I mean, they have challenged the status quo in popular thinking, popular culture, popular representation of what women can do, can't do, are allowed, not allowed. Their influence is very, very far reaching. So a kind of a Kali anthem coming from either of them would definitely resurrect Kali in a very different way. And here too, we have a lot of powerful voices and singers. If they were to do a Kali anthem, or if a lot of men and women together jointly thought of a Kali anthem, that would probably be something that would help us understand the power and the possible impact of a figure like a Kali in our times.
So to kind of wind up this part of the conversation, a question for both of you. What would you like today's Kali to accomplish in today's times?
Would you like to go first?
More than anything else, it would be respect for women and equality, which is deeply felt, not cosmetic, not because of legislation, which would mean a radical turnaround of our thinking and the younger generation to understand how important it is to treat women and men in exactly the same way with a level playing field. If we can even sort that one out, which is a huge big challenge for the whole world, we'll already have changed the world. And the need for a very strong female voice and presence and intuition in resolving conflict across the world. Because what the female energy that a female brain will bring into a war room, a boardroom, I think will generate a whole new way of looking at situations which are still stuck using and adopting old male-dominated thinking, that this is how wars are fought. I think women, the need for a woman who says, no, this is not the way wars are fought at all. I mean, come sit with me across a table and let's sort this out and let's do it as equals, will solve a lot of problems. So I would wait for a woman leader who is not cloning male leaders, but is teaching them what true leadership is about, which is equality.
I think what Kali's greatest gift in terms of her personality is absolute acceptance, absolute the embrace of love, which is so deep that it absolutely doesn't recognize any divisions. The kind of fractures that you see even in Indian society are now so worrying, and they seem to be so stark that you wonder whether they can be bridged. What do we have? Do we have education? We have education. Do we have some sorts of legislation? We have all of those principles, but we do not have this cementing force of a universal acceptance of equality. I would really look for that. I would look for Kali as a principle, not as a figure, not as a gender, not as a gesture, none of the symbolism of her body, but just recognizing that there has to be a deeper embrace within society which will hold it together.
Thank you for that.